Rassie Erasmus, the South African Director of Rugby, as well as the sanction that has come from the Independent Misconduct Committee from World Rugby, which sees him out, banned completely for 2 months, and then for the next 9 months only from match day activities. So, gentlemen in studio, your thoughts on this ban, your thoughts on the madness from after the first test of the British and Irish Lions tour?
I think a couple of things. First of all, it took a tremendous amount of time before this came out, and that's a real disappointment. You know, if a player gets sent off for a red card, it's done within a week. And obviously they were very concerned about what happened. They were very concerned about the defence that South African Rugby and Rassie were going to put up. And they didn't want to slip up on this at all, so they wanted to make sure they had crossed their T's and dotted their I's with regard to the report. It's taken ages, 4 months, I think, before it's come out. But they've come down very, very heavily on Rassie. And if you look at what they were asked to adjudicate on, it's hard to argue that they're incorrect. Just some of them threatening a match official unless a requested meeting took place, attacked, disparaged and denigrated the game, and the match officials did not accept or observe the authority and decisions of match officials. Just when you go through his tape, it's not a question of whether he was correct that Nick Berry had a very poor game, which I still believe Nick Berry did have a very poor game. That wasn't what they were allowed to adjudicate on. They had to adjudicate on whether Rassie broke World Rugby laws in terms of the way in which directors of rugby and coaches deal with refereeing decisions. So, you know, I think in South Africa we've slightly confused the issue. We've said that you know, perhaps they should have looked and seen what the mistakes were that Nick Berry made, and that should mitigate against what Rassie did. But unfortunately, when you are an affiliate of World Rugby, you have to obey World Rugby's laws. If I could just make a simple thing, as a rugby player, you can say, I don't like the maul, therefore I'm going to collapse it. Well, you're always going to get penalised if you collapse the maul. You might not like the law, but you have to play by it. Law. And Rassie was a director of rugby. He has to abide by World Rugby laws, and he was found that he didn't. So he's been heavily sanctioned for that.
Schalk, your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with Nick. A few other things, you know, SA Rugby also got an in for not acting on the misconduct done by the director of rugby, Rassie. You know, they got fined, you know, give or take 400,000 rand. I think where I don't quite buy it is, you know, the whole thing about a character assassination on the referee, because World Rugby came out and said, yes, only 2 points of Rassie was incorrect, or that, you know, it's debatable. In the same breath as that, Siya also came in and made a statement after that first game that said he was treated unfairly. So that was dismissed by World Rugby in the panel. We also, the referees has also sort of gone up against each other. You know, you have the Australia and the New Zealand referees saying the same thing. And obviously, Gcobani said something similar but different, you know, where he felt in his experience that it is better that you approach the coaches directly and deal with the issues as soon as possible. Otherwise, something like this will happen. Look, Rassie was wrong. And, you know, part of me as well, culturally, I don't think that's the way where rugby's want to go. And he got heavily sanctioned for that. But I guess it's time to move on. You know, the sanction was out for Rassie. What it does prove, though, is that the Springboks and World Rugby's already poor relationship is pretty much done. So it's going to be interesting today. There's a lot of added, you know, things that will, you know, put fire in these players' belly. Think about not a single South African player nominated for World Rugby Player of the Year. You think of Siya Kolisi, Ibn Etzebeth, you know, he's playing against Mauro Itoje, that was. You think of 2 Australian players was, you know...
5 tests only?
Yeah, Karevi played 5, and, you know, Hooper's nominated. No problem with DuPont. I think he is outstanding form this year. So, I mean, all of this, you know, builds up. And you see Rassie doing a few things beforehand, and you see Eddie Jones saying, we're saying they're weak. Well, I always say, like on game day, all this small talk stops. You know, once the first kickoff goes, that's when you know who's prepped well and who's up for it. And I believe the Boks will be up for today.
Yeah, Mourinho-esque. That's what this week has looked like. Bobs, for you, how much will the Springboks miss Rassie, his presence in the team?
Well, I think this all plays into his hands in terms of the psychology that he sort of loves to work with in terms of his players. It's the Springboks against the world. And I think the players will sort of want to do it for him because this team always play to a meaningful thing, a bigger than them sort of mindset. And I think now with them being at this troubled water stage where everything seems to be against them, I think that's what motivates this team. I think this team wants to show to the world that they are world champions, and they'll do anything to make sure that they can be full good representatives of South Africa. And it's a thing for them where it's up against the wall, backs against the wall, we're tweaking them. And there's a lot that we have to prove. I think it's a team that has tried to prove itself for the last 2 years.
Just sadly out of this, it hasn't rectified the issue that there is between how do players and coaches, how do they manage to get a quick answer from referees after a game? I mean, World Rugby didn't accept, the committee didn't accept that it affected his selections. They said he was often criticizing decisions that were made by all the officials, TMO and the referee, and they didn't believe it was affecting the way he could then coach and pick his team. Rassie disagrees with that. But my point is, surely in a game like this where you want to put to bed a game by Monday, there has to be a lot of work put in on the Saturday night, Sunday by World Rugby and World Rugby referees and their manager, as well as the referee on the day, because both coaches will be wanting answers. And to wait until the Tuesday, I think, is just not professional enough. I don't think that there's a proper open communication between the coaches and even the players and the referee at the moment.
I think that you're right. I think what the public and the world of rugby wants is transparency, first of all, accountability for the referees, because people lose their livelihoods. Coaches lose their livelihoods. The players get put into spaces where they compromise on how to make a living again. So I think transparency and accountability, that's what's mostly needed. And that's where World Rugby has to finally start living to this era and this generation where everything is out there in public. And we must know what is the selection criteria, how the refs ref around, because we know a lot about the players and their stats because they've put out there in the public. So everything has to be out there so that in that way we can get away from this confusion and most of the time mistrust.
Close and good.
I just think rugby's got a protected species, you know, endangered species, and that's the referee. And I think that barrier's got to fall down. It's got to be an open discussion. Rugby can be a debate. And when Rassie doesn't get answers, or coaches don't get answers by the Wednesday, where it's by all means too late. You know, Monday's knowledge day, Tuesday is your workload day, Wednesday is where you touch up on a few things and maybe have a high tempo day. You need that information from the referee. You make a selection decision on whether players conceded 4 or 5 penalties or 2 penalties or 1 penalty, or whether it's a yellow card or a red card. So for me, it's got to be way more approachable. And I think when we were playing, all we wanted to have is accountability from the referee, or a referee coming to you and say, sorry, I had a bad game.
That's it.
And you know what? I would forgive him straight on the spot. I have poor games too, and he'll move on. You know, it's not a character assassination. It's coming up front and saying, listen, guys, I'll have a lot more respect if you come out and say, I had a poor game, I made a couple of mistakes.